the screen.
Yeah, let me put that up now.
All right, so we had listed as item number 4, housing is tentative. That is not ready to go tonight, so we will just have the discussion of parks and open space. So let's, I'm not saying we're going to finish before 9, but if we do, that's okay too.
That would be great, yeah.
So, and then the only other thing, and Tammy, I really appreciate your pointing out the timing of all this and our need to move ahead. You know, I talked with county staff, and one of the things they suggested that if the sections, maybe all the sections except land use could be done by the Christmas holiday, that would be something they could work with in terms of a more deep dive at that point. So if we can do that, I mean, frankly, if we could get through land use, that would be great too. But if we could at least shoot for getting everything with initial task force approval by the end of the year, that would be helpful. Any comments or questions on that idea?
Just a clarification, when they say they would like to have all sections, with the possible exception of land use, to be completed before the holidays, by that they mean they understand prior to their own review of it. Is that correct?
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly, John. So, any other questions or comments on that goal?
Supervisor, I know Tammy mentioned right before you started that Commissioner Carter, if there's time, would be able to provide an update on something that he was working on.
Oh,
And may need 30 minutes or so. Is that what that was correct, right, Tammy?
Correct.
all right. Okay, so I guess we would do that, Tammy, after Parks and Open Space, if there's time.
Right. And John's here and can speak, but it would be another check off our list of 14 chapters. So it'd be a
Well, we're
good one.
checking those. Thank you, Tammy.
I thought you were thinking of doing that next Monday, not tonight, but.
Oh, you don't want to do it tonight? Okay, John.
If you would like, I might be able to do it.
Yeah, that's up to you.
All right, let me see if I can find it here.
Okay.
Thanks for
Jennifer,
hurting us, Tammy.
Yeah, poor John. And I got the whip out, John. Sorry, I got the whip out.
It's okay. Oh, it's okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
please?
Tammy, please.
Can Charles Colby, do you need help with public facilities? Happy to help you. I don't even think Charles is on, is he?
I'm on. I just couldn't unmute. No, I don't need help. I'm good. I just have to compile the feedback that I got and wrap it up.
Okay, if you need information or some feedback you're not getting, please call me, because I did this chapter before, and I probably can help you with information.
Sure,
We're just really
bigger
wanting
than
to get
last
these
time.
things reported and checked off.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay.
Jennifer's trying to log on, just to let you know. I don't think she's on yet, but I know she's working on it.
Okay, Jose, do you got any messages?
I'm gonna check my.
I know she's trying to log on
Okay.
for sure. She just must be having trouble.
And yes, I can do my thing tonight if you like.
Okay, well, John, if we have time,
Yes.
As we're waiting, is there any more clarity about our next meetings?
Monday.
you mean in terms of topics, John?
in terms of dates.
Jose, what do we have lined up?
It helps to unmute. Sorry about that. So, so we do have, like Tammy mentioned, Monday. We do have the following Monday, the 29th. And if we're going into December, we basically are meeting regularly on Monday. The last one would be December 13th. That third Monday is usually Reston P&Z. So, and I know it's the week of Christmas, so it would be Tuesday the 21st if we need it at that point.
So that would be Monday the 6th.
Yep, Monday the 6th, Monday the 13th, and then Tuesday the 21st. And I could send out like the next dates to everyone through the listserv first thing tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to help, John.
Okay, any other questions about the agenda or future meeting dates?
Walter, this is David Vanel. Just
David.
a comment back about the, I think it's a perfectly fine plan to try to get everything done and out of the way before the end of the year, but except for land use. But in order to maybe shorten the, not so much our schedule, but the staff schedule, I was assuming that everybody responsible for a chapter was actually in touch with the proper people in the proper department at staff, and that staff is already having a look at some of this stuff, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's a good question, David. St. Clair or Chris, do you have any insights into that? Are those conversations happening? Sorry.
Supervisor Alcorn, hi, this is St. Clair Williams. So yes, the various chapters are having representatives are working on the very topics, are in discussion with the various staff teams and working on helping them with draft language, answering questions like that. There's some topics where staff is still working to schedule those meetings, but yes, those meetings are occurring to help the task force get all of those topics. Because their drafts done before we get into the full staff review of the topics.
And then I'll just add, jumping in for John.
Yes,
Newton,
Gary.
The transportation people really went over the transportation chapter, and that worked exceedingly well.
Okay, great. Thank you, St. Clair. Thank you, Gary. David, any more follow-up on that?
No, sir, that's it. Although, as a sort of a side issue, I would like to have, if possible, a meeting with me and Lynn and John Carter this week, because I'd like to finalize what I've got, redraft to housing, and maybe try to get it wedged into next Monday's meeting. So I don't know whether Jose wants to do that. I know Graham Owen had said something about it, so I'm not quite sure who should be setting it up. But anyway, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to assist with that, David.
Hey, David. Lynn has had to go back to Houston for her mother's medical issues.
Oh,
I believe she will be back next weekend.
This coming weekend, or
the coming weekend? Yes.
This coming weekend.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
as it stands now.
Okay. Thank you for that, John Carter. Over to you. Do you want to try to meet this coming weekend sometime?
Sure.
After she's back?
Yes.
And she may be able to take a call while she's gone. It depends.
I don't want to. I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to interrupt her activity with mom. So, anyway.
How about Saturday morning at 10?
She's not going to be back until the evening.
She's coming back on Saturday. You won't
About
be here
Sunday-
until.
How
the
about Sunday at
afternoon on
1?
Saturday.
About Sunday at 1 tentatively?
You'd have to talk to her.
Well, I'll help David and maybe contact Lynn and help set that up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
All right, a lot of meetings going on. Thank you. Appreciate that. Other questions, comments about the agenda, upcoming meetings, schedule, anything? Okay. So, oh, good. So it looks like, Jose, it looks like we might be ready to move on then.
Yeah, I believe Jennifer just joined us.
Okay. All right. Welcome, Jennifer. Good timing. We just talked
Sorry
about.
about that. I had board meetings all day and just walked in the door.
No problem.
So hopefully my brain can switch quickly to new topic. The last that we left the Parks and Recs group, there were some assignments out there from individuals. I don't believe I saw any edits to Parks and Recs from task force members this week. But obviously, if you would like to make some edits, we can do those if you send them along. The pieces that we had left from last time were to discuss as a group the funding distribution for proffered items and how we want to address that language as a group. The discussions from months ago related to, is there anything that the task force would like to recommend, for proffered items to the development community. We did decide last meeting not to do a preference list on those things that are in the comp plan or priority list, hierarchical in order. So I'm not sure if that also will apply to the proffered area, but there is a fair amount of funding and there are many groups in Reston that may be equipped to work with developers or proffered money. So I didn't know if there was any recommendation the task force wanted to put in the chapter on that.
Are you talking about open space?
Parks, Rec, and Open Space, yes.
Okay, I did send edits this week to everybody,
You did?
actually.
Okay, then that means I missed them. I'll look for them right now, Jen.
Okay, well, the main one was the name of the Southgate Community Center, which is actually the
Right, it
Kathy
was
Hopkins.
renamed. Yep, I have that as a note
Okay.
in the last draft because it was changed after we made the edits, the last draft.
Okay, and then the question is, do we want the initials to be CHCC with the @ sign, S, or just remove the @ sign?
I would think that would be the board at the community center that would make that determination as to how they want to be identified. But we would be happy to identify them, however they would like their name to be in the comp plan. Happy to make that edit.
Okay, I'll let you know what happens.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any edits that came in on my email since.
And Jennifer, I apologize.
Yeah.
I have some which I will type up and get to you by early tomorrow morning.
Sure, no worries.
Okay.
I do not, am I wrong? Do we not have a task force meeting next week?
Yes, we do.
We do. Next Monday,
Yes.
Thanksgiving week. Okay. So as long as you get them to me before, by Sunday, that,
I have
I
another
can incorporate them.
I
Yes.
don't know if you got it. It's under Recreation Center. It's on page 3. So it was full-size basketball court and other recreation features. multi-coast, let's see.
Yes, those are all the ones that you sent me on June 7th. So I sent those to the task force at the end of the last meeting.
Okay,
And those are our latest edits, were the ones you sent in July.
okay, very good.
So unless you've sent some since those July ones, then those are already on the list.
Well, I sent them actually on November 11th.
Again, the same
Well,
ones?
I sent the ones I'm talking about. Like page 7, Kathy, that's another name of Kathy Hudgens Community Center at Southgate on page 7 at the bottom. I don't know if you got that. As I say, I sent it to all the task force, but I sent it on Sunday.
Yeah, you did send it, Jan. I saw your email on Sunday.
Okay, then
I can send
I
it
will
to you.
find it. Yeah,
Jennifer.
I'll find it in my email. It's
Okay.
probably just a search issue in Gmail.
Jennifer, while I have you, I know you had sent some follow-up items for staff, and I know that they provided responses in July, and it wasn't
Mhm.
clear to me if those ones had answered them. So I know that they weren't going to be prepared to provide that language tonight. So I didn't know if it would be
That's-
helpful.
Yeah, that's not, I wasn't expecting
Okay.
language from them tonight. I was just expecting for us to go over the last
Okay.
piece that we didn't finish
Okay. All right.
last meeting, which was on that funding mechanism or funding language, if there's any that we're going to consider putting in the draft.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
But yes, hopefully we'll be able to bring anyone else's edits and the assignments that we had from last week back to the task force soon.
Jennifer, this is Bill Penniman.
Yes.
I have some edits. I haven't finished getting through them. I'm nearly through, but I will get those to you.
Yes, you were one of the ones that are on the list. That would be great. Thank you.
And I'm on your list, but I have some other comments too. Thank you.
Jennifer, do you want to discuss any of the items orally that some of us have, if they're bigger item issues or not?
Sure. If you guys have new items that we didn't tackle in the subgroup meetings that I gave the update on last meeting, happy to add them to the list.
I would toss out 3 or 4.
Sure.
So the first one is the table on page 2 and the table on pages 4 to 5 are somewhat duplicative. The one on page 1 is sort of a mini programmatic look at what shows up in greater detail on pages 4 and 5. And I wonder whether we want that kind of duplication. That's one question.
Okay, so just want to show it really quick. You said the table on pages 4 to 5, so that would be this one, everyone.
Right.
Versus the table on
if I said 2, I meant 1. If I said 1, I meant 2.
on page 2. Okay.
So that's almost like laying out the scheme for the table on pages 4 to 5.
Yes, this is laying out the scheme. So I guess I have to go back and double check it, but I think that was the intention, is that we were putting kind of the photos of overall definition for these major topic areas at the top and briefly describing them as to kind of this here's our vision of what each of those broad topics mean. And then as you kind of scroll down, when you get to this table, these are very specific. And we had it split into large public open spaces. So this is the specific recommendations for large public open spaces. And the table above that was, this is what a large public open space is. This is what it would look like. Does that make sense?
Definitions versus
I understand. I guess my question is whether it's worth a duplication, but that's an editorial.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
Does
anyone have any thoughts on that?
I have a thought on something else, but it would be in the table, I'm sure. Is there any place that we can put a bigger linear park. We've talked about the fact that the parks are ridiculously small. Is there any way that we can stipulate a linear park would be, instead of 4 by 3, that it would have to be a minimum of 6 feet by whatever we decide? But if we could get the linear parks to be bigger, so they're not just having the developer come in and put in a couple of grass around a fire hydrant and call it a linear park.
Called a pocket park.
Right. That's what I mean. If we could make that bigger, I mean, have specifications, that might be really helpful for developers and for us to have something that's not laughable.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that Jose was talking about. The subgroup had requested some assistance with those definitions. And Jose sent me what they had sent in July, of a couple pages that we might look at in the old plan, which I believe I looked at, but I'll go back and double check. And then Tammy emailed me, I saw about 3 minutes before I logged on, an email that she had found a link to a Fairfax County site. I think that might be able to help us with some language. So we might be able to, but that was what the subgroup was kind of talking about, is what is the Reston specification for parks and open space? And is that the same or different than the county-wide written standards?
And could we
And
make it bigger?
the subgroup kind of felt like the Reston standard in the non-TSA, TOD areas is a much larger park than what the county defines as a pocket park, was an example they gave. But any language that anybody has that you all think should help define what our standard of park or open space guidelines should be, would be very helpful to add to the chapter.
So Tammy just sent you an email. Did that specify something, Tammy, in terms of definitions?
It's a 2014 amended 2017 Fairfax County Park document, and it talks about suburban, and but it's from 17, but it has language in it. And what, sitting on the P&Z, I just have to say this out loud, what we've been getting over and over again in the TSAs, particularly the TOD areas right by the stations, are ridiculous, non-usable, most creative verbiage on the planet, descriptions of parks that are the pocket parks. Literally, one is the size of maybe 2 trash dumpsters pushed together with a pergola on top, period. And that was approved for a townhouse development right near the Wheatley TSA. That's it. That's their open space. The problem is plans are being approved there that aren't livable for the people, and they're not near RA facilities, even if they would reach over and use stuff that they don't pay for. So there's a complete dearth of park facilities for these urban spots, and we have to stop that. And I don't know whether we put a firm Reston definition of what we require in a pocket park. The definition the county has is perfectly legitimate, except it's been abused. And people are saying something is a pocket park, and it is not. It is not big enough to be a pocket park. It's a sham.
Tammy, given the definition that the county has, can we make that more explicit?
That's exactly what I'm saying, Gary. We would have to do that. And that's the debate, and we need to have a meeting to do that. and then present it to the task force for description. I can't pull that out of my hat tonight unless we want to sit there and wordsmith, which I don't think we want to do at this point. We need to do that in our subgroup, but I'm happy to do that, take that on. We need to get these the parks and open space, this housing and public facilities complete so that the land use group can finish. We can't finish without the information that's in there so that we know what is it that Reston needs, and then how do we plan for it as we give our recommendations for our subunits. So that's our dichotomy and that's our conflict, is we need these chapters done. I'm willing to help anybody who needs some assistance so we can get them done. If I don't know, I don't know everything for sure, but I'll find you somebody who does, who can give you some information, and at least we get it in and let staff look at it.
And I think that was particularly the reason why on this one topic within Parks, Rec, and Open Space that we had asked the staff for some help with it, because if you look at the county definitions of a pocket park, it seems very acceptable, but the interpretation does not seem to work in Reston. So if they could help give us some language so that we know that their interpretation means the same as our interpretation, that's where the meeting of the minds was, the intention of asking staff for that help. Because they've been on calls and have kind of heard the pieces that we think are our definitions would be a little bit different. So what words do you use to describe our definition that would make sense to them, so that when they're interpreting new developments, the types of parks and open space that we're looking for would be the ones that would be approved. But we digressed, and Mooney was on item number 1, which was the duplication of the tables, and you had, I believe, 3 or 4, Mooney. So if you want to continue on your list. And if you're
John, you're on mute.
I was going to say, I can't see you, but if you're talking, then you're on mute.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize. So my second one has to do with our 2 golf courses. So we need not repeat the well-known and strong commitment we have to 2 golf courses. What I find a bit awkward is that the 2 golf courses appear in the table with the heading new parks and open spaces, and it's summarized in the section on pages 2 to what is it, 2 to 4 or 2 to 3.
So it's here on as number 8.
Yeah, so summary of recommendations for new parks, recreation, and open spaces. So calling them new is the problem. So where would be the appropriate location, because they're not really new parks or open spaces. In fact, we're arguing for their historical longevity back into the past and into the future. So that is a question I had, how to handle that.
Okay.
Jen, if I can make a suggestion to take care of that, the new label is on page 2 on our sample table where we're showing the different types of parks, right, John? On page 2 that we had up before. New parks. So maybe we go for types of parks and open spaces instead of new. Would that work?
It depends on what the authors are intending. If these are new things they want.
No, this is samples. The photographs will inform. These are examples of. I'm on the working group, so Jen,
right.
Do you agree with that? And these are examples. So we're going to show you pictures.
Right. So this is kind of the wish list is below specific items, but we also know that developers bring their ideas to the table. And so this chart was to explain what category we would put things in based on photographs and then, you know, a description of them.
So
So
that takes care of the
do you know what I
table.
mean? We don't want to block out the ability for directors to be, or developers to be creative and say, hey, this isn't on your list, Reston, but we think adding X to the community would really be beneficial.
Exactly.
And that this chart would give them some ideas of whether we would consider that a public open space or a sports facility or a small open space. Does that help?
So that takes care in a very handy way the problem with the table at the top of page 2. However, the what follows immediately on pages 2, 3, and I think into
Right.
yeah, even into 4, the title there is Summary of Recommendations for New Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. And those are indeed new. And yet on page 3, we see the golf courses listed near the top of page 3. Again,
so
it's
I can
not,
move, yeah, we can move that. You can move it around so that we show the value that we place in the existing facilities, and take it out of the new section. We'll
right.
just move it. Okay.
Why don't you just take out the word new? Because implied in your statement of summary of recommendations for parks, recreation, and open space, you don't need new there. You just need parks, recreation, and open space, and you can talk about new in the detailed subparagraphs.
David, that's a good suggestion, except that I believe, as I read all this, most of the other items on pages 2 through 4, through the top of page 4, are indeed new.
Well, you've got Barron Cameron, don't forget, John, is in there, which is a big area. So they exist just as much as the golf courses do at this point.
Okay. Anyway, so
those were going to be changed. Okay.
So if we take out
Keep going,
new
John,
here,
and I'll
then
come
it
back
could
to
be,
this.
could be
Or
it.
do you want to discuss now?
Could be it. Well, I'm thinking that, and I'm sorry, I don't know who said take out new here. We could take out new, and that would still cover Barron Cameron Park because there's a change, as you just said, Bill, that we haven't seen. Yeah, well, for the current Reston master or the Barron Cameron Park master plan that hasn't been implemented yet. That's what I think we're referring to here. That would be, you know, and I don't know the funding mechanisms, but somehow that needs to be funded. And I think we're saying as a comp plan task force, we support the master plan that's in place at Barron Cameron Park that hasn't been implemented yet.
Not necessarily, but let's save that for another time.
Okay. By putting it here, it turns into a recommendation for parks, and they could be existing or non-existing, but nonetheless a change or a new. So I think that covers that, but because there are no recommended changes to the golf courses, we can still move that out of.
Jen, we could say recommendations for new and existing and cover everything. So then it goes in a logical geographic if you want to do that.
Does that sound good?
Alternatively, the second sentence under golf courses near the top of 3 is a suggestion for something new at the golf courses. Its golf courses should be incorporated into conservation open space easements for their preservation as open space. So, I mean, if there is a dimension of newness there, so you could either say new, you know, new or improved parks and open spaces or something. I don't know.
But you could just say recommendations, and that's the key word here is recommendations, right? And you don't have to go into new and existing as an alternative. And maybe the word summary is not necessary either, just a thought.
So
This
we
is Bill
could do
Penniman. Could I
this.
just make two comments? One, certainly I agree with what John said, that golf courses are not new. They don't belong in a new or proposed section. Beyond that, I thought the understanding was that this task force was not going to attempt to do a resolution of the future of the golf courses beyond what was said in the last, in the existing comp plan. And third, there is another place in the document where it calls for 12 new large athletic fields, full-size athletic fields. And there is no physical location where one could put those other than taking over a golf course, which I'm not proposing, but there is a conflict between those two propositions. I mean, assuming we're not going to cut down trees, take over land from RA, but physically there isn't any place for it other than one of the golf courses, which I wouldn't support personally, but I don't think 12 athletic fields makes any sense, given the many recreational and park amenities that are in and surround the TSAs.
Is there a number that we need?
Jen, maybe if you could just come up with some language and float it by everybody that takes in the comments you've heard, and then we can kind of keep moving along.
I believe, Mooney, that was your number 2
Right.
item, which means
And
we're at 3.
And I'll put the rest into a third and only a third. And that is, you point out that there's probably coordination to be done between the transportation chapter and this chapter with regards to both trails and also with parkways. And you're absolutely right. There is even duplicated languages in some of it. So we'll have to figure that out. I just want to affirm what you said. There is overlap in the treatment of trails and in the treatment of parkways.
Yes, we'll do an offline call on that one. There any other pieces of the text
If I can make
specifically
just
you want
one,
me to look at? Go ahead, Tammy.
one comment on the idea that we need 12 fields. They don't all have to be 12 in one spot. So it is conceivable that we might get a couple of full-size fields out of the TSA area. We don't know that. We don't want to preclude that. I just want to bring that up and put that in language to be sure that's clear. Thank you.
Jennifer, this is Mark. One question, and maybe this is a Walter question more than a question for you, but what's the status of the indoor performing arts center generally? I know that there's a proffer out there that provides a location for it upon certain circumstances, but I don't know whether that's likely to happen at this point or not. Does anybody have any updated information?
Yeah, Mark, the last I heard was, my understanding is county staff is looking at the economics of it, both in terms of how much subsidy would be required and frankly, how to pay for it. So that I think was still, there's not yet a recommendation from county staff on that, but that's what I'm waiting on.
And I would add that I think that a process is going to begin after the first of the year to try and get public input on what the shape of such a facility would be and how it could be put together using county, whatever resources available. So there will be a process beginning to try and pin that down and give it more shape.
I wanted to inject that the golf courses are already listed in the first paragraph, the introduction. I don't think we need to list them anywhere else. I think we should just keep them in the introduction of what's existing and take it off the table. I don't think that, because that whole table is about new, proposed, and this is the introduction summary does list the golf courses. I'd say just keep it in there and take off the golf courses on the table. That's my recommendation.
Well, if anyone has any language they would like changed in the chapter, I said that I would take doing the subgroup with the 4 issues. I'm not the author of this chapter, so we do need some people to take a stab at making the final edits. And if no one has anything on funding, then that means nothing's going in the chapter on funding.
Can we go to your list, Jen, and look at what you had for discussion? We got through some of that. I think, were you planning to do that?
I wasn't, because we went through it last time, but I can put it
I
back
thought
up.
we had some things that were open.
We just had the funding one. Give me a second, I have to bring it up. It's a different document.
Jennifer, this is David.
Mhm.
Regarding the funding, are there county-wide funding sources for park facilities, recreational facilities that we could at least reference in this document?
David, there is bond funding. You know, because of the age of the county and most of our facilities, most of that capital bond funding is going towards rehabilitation of existing parks facilities, but there is some that goes to new as well. That should be referenced.
There's another source. Every project that gets approved has a contribution to parks that they have to make, and it's hard to deal with that. It's often hard to target that to specific parks, but there is a funding source there, and it's going to be a lot of dollars, although over a lot of dollars over a lot of period of time.
Yeah, and just to embellish on that, there's, for the areas inside the TSA, there's the on-site park requirement.
Right.
That is the bane of Tammy's existence. And then there's the ball field's contribution on top of that. So for every project inside the TSAs, you're required to do the urban park requirements on site, plus the provision of financial resources to provide regional ball field improvements, unless the development itself generates the need for a ball field based on the size of it. And really, there's been, I guess, 3 projects at this point that have reached that threshold. For all other projects outside of the TSAs, you make a per unit or contribution towards regional facilities, and that's collected by the Park Authority and used for capital improvements in the general vicinity of the property, typically, but not always.
I would say, Mark, this is a little, that's true, and it's formulaic, and it's quite a lot of dollars. Although those dollars are coming to the county over a period of time, because you get the dollars at building permit time, I believe, Mark. It's generally used for fields, but I don't see why those funds couldn't be going to the Park Authority for things like the Recreation Center, perhaps the Performing Arts Center, other projects like that, I know they're generally used for the large fields, but I don't see why we couldn't broaden that out a bit.
It's a philosophical conversation, John, but I think one of the disconnects is that I'll just limit it to the park authority at the moment, but there's a reluctance to utilize eminent domain or to, it's very rare that the park authority acquires new property through anything other than a dedication these days. They still will acquire properties every so often where they can, but they tend to be more outlying as opposed to, I'll call it infill properties. And so the the ability to acquire new acreage through the purchase of land or the acquisition of land in more urban areas is limited by the reluctance to utilize eminent domain authority.
I think that's a good point, but on my two examples, the recreation center is proposed on public land as well. The Performing Arts Center, I don't know that you would count that as public land, but at least it is land.
Yeah.
That probably wouldn't take eminent domain, but I get your point about the eminent domain.
Yeah, I'm not excluding from that the dedication of land, right? I'm including that in the conversation because the park authority is still getting that, but it's not typically purchasing land in addition to what they might get proffered.
I was just pointing out that those funds, although not traditionally, they could be used for other things besides ball fields. They could be for recreation
Correct.
centers and maybe the Performing Arts Center.
Yeah, I
Or
agree.
another thing that was talked about is trail connections between the current trail system that's privately owned, and I remember someone had brought one up about connections into Lake Fairfax Park. So we can get from south on Wheelie to the park, to Lake Fairfax Park, and could funds be used by someone to do that as well?
I guess one of the questions for us when we're looking at the text right now is if we put language on funding and that we would like to see some of this funding that go towards these facilities, will that be effective? Will that achieve that goal, or do we have to go about that through another means?
Michelle, this is Mark. I'll jump in. I think it's a great question because for the reasons I was saying earlier about the reluctance of utilization of eminent domain, it can sometimes be difficult to bridge the gap between existing facilities and new facilities where there are existing properties or existing developments in between the two. So to Jennifer's point about making trail connections, developers typically can only control what goes to their property line. They will frequently proffer to try to get connections off-site to be able to link up things or improve things over public property between point A and point B. Where it becomes difficult is if you have to cross a third party or fourth party owner's property to do so, it's not always automatic that you can do that. And so that's where you kind of have to rely on the public sector to be able to come in and acquire those missing links. And I know that at least in the transportation realm, there are proffer dollars that are collected that are intended to address those missing links where you're crossing a property that's not developing and not providing a facility to connect from one development to another development over a property in between. But I don't know how the park authority is utilizing those funds to deal with those missing gaps from a trail connection standpoint or otherwise.
So I think that that's more it, and you know, directly what Commissioner Carter was saying, not necessarily the eminent domain, but I guess this is more for perhaps Supervisor Alcorn. if we say that we want the park authority to use this money, or we want this money to go towards something specific, will that be effective through the comprehensive plan?
Yeah, the plan can provide guidance on things like that. The park authority has its own process independently, you know, their master planning process for parks. And they've also lined up funding for various projects. But I guess, Michelle, what I would recommend is that, you know, if the task force has thoughts, go ahead and get them down. And whether they end up in the comprehensive plan or just recorded elsewhere, I think it would be useful.
I think one thing that would also help just with community communications too is if we have some form of a real time, or as close as possible, you know, tracking of how the money's being used, and we can see that that money's being used in Reston and for Reston facilities. I think that might be part of the issue here as well.
Hey, Michelle, I'm taking notes. Just FYI, even though it's not on screen.
I can
Thank
send
you
you
for
some
that.
language too, Jen.
Thank you.
I've got an
Language is
idea,
always helpful.
an idea that might go with this. Maybe call it a GAPS program. And Michelle was talking about filling in. I know Jan has talked about the Greenway and South Reston. Maybe some of these parks funds could go towards a GAPS program that would fill in the trails or other areas. I don't know. That would take another paragraph within our text, somewhat extraneous, but if you want to add it, I think it's probably a good source.
I think that's something that's much needed, so that would be worth adding. Yeah.
It does take, as Supervisor Alcorn is saying, you can put what you want in the comp plan, but it takes agreement from parks to make it work, since they have their own funding and their own processes. So it might be worth a question to parks before we just throw it in the comp plan.
If we're talking about gaps in trails, that might fit more logically in the transportation plan.
That's true too. Yeah. And there's a spending source there as well.
And I think there is language already in the draft. But
yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that would be a good place to put it.
I think that's correct, John.
Okay, now, Tammy, you asked me to share the document that the subgroup had worked on. And I believe it was this one.
Can you make it bigger?
Sure.
Great.
That better?
Yeah, that's good.
Jennifer, this is Bill.
Yes.
Let me just make a comment on the urban park framework.
Okay.
It's a fine guideline, but it's written on a blank slate. Reston is unique in the extraordinary number of park and recreation facilities that exist right next to the TSAs. They include, you know, the golf courses, the Lake Fairfax Park, the W&OD. The total acreage of those is astonishing. Plus, if people are willing to live in the TSAs, are willing to pay, they can use the tennis courts, Reston Association, the pools. There's just an extraordinary number of things. So we should make the TSAs as beautiful and friendly as possible, but we shouldn't get caught up in whether a certain magic number in the urban parks framework is met in a particular situation. The other thing I would just say, and this spills into the the land use section, I guess, is when one's talking about making available ground space, whether it's for pocket parks or larger parks, the height of the building matters. If you have tall buildings, you have the potential for more land available for using to use for parks. And if one tamps down the height of the buildings because of some set of rules, then you make it harder. So they all these things interplay. That's all.
Bill, please remember that it's parks and open space in the TSA that make the TSA area beautiful and livable. The last thing I think anybody would want would be for Roslyn or Crystal City to be what the TSA turns into. We need to have the appropriate amount of parks and open space in that area to live up to its potential.
Where are we in the outline? What?
Can you go to
Tammy
the?
just asked me to bring it up.
Yeah, can you go to the bottom of this, please? The second page, please.
Sure.
Okay, we did this. Malcolm, did he have any words of wisdom on the wetlands?
I haven't heard anything.
Mark's on tonight. I didn't know whether he had.
I hadn't made anything. I've been out of pocket for quite a bit. Relative to some things for what Dennis said a moment ago, Crystal City has some superb facilities, including running, pocket parks, as well as the Long Branch Park, with a huge number of fields that actually support it. You got to understand, it is one of the, it has a number of excellent features that actually are stronger than what's in the TSAs right now. I have to speak to it. Thanks.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. Point taken. Let's all pay attention to how Crystal City does stuff then. Not that we want to be Crystal City, but if they're able to have some beautiful facilities, let's follow that example.
But what about the wetlands, Mark? Did you have
any
The wetlands, again, still is privately owned. It is not publicly accessible directly. With that, Transwestern manages the property for the subsidiary of Massachusetts Mutual. The consideration is, at some point, should there be a consideration of any kind of a land swap with the Board of Supervisors property as a potential to create the wetlands as county-owned property, or some kind of, as originally is in the existing land use section, private partnership, public partnership. I've never heard Massachusetts Mutual actually talked about with the Board of Supervisors property for creating that kind of partnership to get that wetland publicly accessible and also useful as a real park. But that's one of those things, and I had not suggested that directly before, but never heard it discussed either.
Mark, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Are you aware of any violation of, ecological rules, or the fact that it is a mosquito producer and could be a health hazard? Is there any sort of, I'm just asking anybody, actually, anybody know of any federal regulation that might oversee the cleaning up of the park? So at least it's not a hazard.
Technically it is, first, technically it is not a park.
Not 100. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
So the second thing regarding mosquito control, because of the Board of Supervisors property adjacent, that's where they actually have mosquito monitoring in that wide open field adjacent. Yes, the summertime, the lily pads, and also the insect life, as well as the poison oak and poison ivy, are astounding in that area. Very minimal has been done by the current property owner to maintain that facility. It could change drastically if the tenant for the nearby property, the 2245, in June of 2020, Walmart Labs signed a 10 or 11-year lease that has never occupied that building, has the whole facility. They would kind of press the owner to actually make that area more useful. There are potentials.
Thank you. Okay, that's what I wanted to look at, Jen, on this sheet.
I'm not sure
Thank
that
you.
that settles. Do we want to make comments in the Park and Rec section about the wetlands?
I don't think so if it's not officially a park.
Right.
It's not officially a park, but it's a potential for development. And I'll try to figure out a sentence or two to give to Jennifer.
And the other
Well, then
thing,
maybe that should go in land use then and not in parks.
At
Right?
present, that I would have to agree.
Okay.
maybe, and Mark, another thing while we've got you on the hot seat, we had said that we were gonna do Reston, and we were hoping that you knew about park areas outside of Reston, west of Reston, in the area that we are assigned to cover in the master plan. Is there anything there? I think you had mentioned
There are
was.
several ball fields, and there are several, if you will, urban type parks that I thought had been partially covered, but there's one that has not in the language that currently exists because it got built. It's sort of like Walkthrough Park exists in the Woodland East, but on the right against the toll road, they added 2 ball fields adjacent to the soon to be exited VWOA headquarters building with all the buildings that are being built.
Okay.
I am here this week. End of the week, I have 2 weeks away between Christiansburg and Richmond with family projects that I've got to get done. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jen, is that what we need for that? If Mark can.
Yeah, if we could have the list, the appendix has a list of all of the facilities in the Reston boundaries, and that would be really helpful to have all of those in there. And then if there's any, a sentence or two that you think should be appropriate to speak to any improvements on those, that would be helpful, because we could not find anyone that was super familiar enough to speak to it.
I'll work to it.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on?
On playgrounds, they said Michelle would add some verbiage.
Mhm.
But I didn't see it in the one.
No, when I get the language from all of the people that are kind of assigned, like Mark, just took on an assignment. Michelle has one. Bill Penniman has one. There's a few of it, like Mark or John Mooney and I have one. I'll bring them together in one fell swoop, so you guys can review them together.
The last paragraph there, that was probably added by Jan. I think that's a good addition. I think we ought to get the language right. We call it a linear park in one area, and then the next sentence we call it a greenway. Probably should be called a linear park in both situations. Do you see that? That's okay. But in the last sentence, it has future greenway. Maybe that should be linear park.
Okay.
Well, there's a difference, and I wrote this, by the way, and that's fine. I'm glad you are clarifying that. But this Pinecrest Greenway is a connector, but according to the people to whom I spoke in the neighborhood, they are not looking at this as much, and this was my dichotomy. Does this go in transportation as a connector or as in a linear park? And you could say that the WNOD linear park is our other salient linear park in Reston. This particular area, they want no visible, like civilization. They want to keep it natural, no, impervious surfaces. They want the nature, the habitat. It's an abandoned VDOT thing. It's not going to be used or developed. And it's beautiful woods. So what the neighborhood is asking for, and this has a little bit of linkage of RA, a little bit, this VDOT right of way, and then a little bit of the Pinecrest cluster. And they're really excited to have this park. So I don't think it's going to be a problem with getting a park easement for it. But it's more to enjoy the nature, the solitude, the meditation than it is I'm going from, Glade from the Kathy Hudgens Center to Fox Mill Road. There will be some people who will use it for that, no doubt. And there will be people coming in from the Fox Mill Road area to enjoy the area. But primarily it's for those neighbors in that community area to have a meditative, quiet spot for nature.
I
So
guess
it's not
I would suggest if you want to make that more clear, I would say green linear park is the Pinecrest Greenway that preserves existing vegetation. And then I would use the same term in the last sentence, future green linear park. I guess I was trying to make a difference between the greenway that's along the WNOD trail that's long and wide, and then this one that tends to be smaller. So I was using linear park, but future
right, and it
park.
truly is linear, but it's meditative, not transportation oriented.
Yes.
So that's why it would be in parks versus the beautiful thing that you've evolved along the WNOD.
Right, and that's why I was saying it preserves the current
Thank
vegetation, makes it a little more clear on.
Actually, we could take linear out of it. It just happens.
So. The task force wanted the greenway all the way through. They called it the greenway at the beginning because it is special.
You're talking about the local Pinecrest task force.
Right? Yeah, there was a task force that was studying this.
That's what I'm saying. I want to delineate us from them because we have not discussed this before except for your fabulous PowerPoint. So I want to be sure that these people listening tonight understand they didn't miss something, that it's another task force. Thank you, Jan.
Okay. I have another thing that's rattling around in my head here. That this would be a staff assignment. I think we have these 12 ball fields in everybody's mind, or at least a lot of people's minds. So I would think that if there's a possible way to do this, and I think this is very simple, take the data in the land use plan and calculate how many of these large recreation facilities are needed. Is it 12? Is it 13? Is it 10? Is it 15? What is it? It would be a simple calculation. I think the staff would have to do that. But if there is a formula, and I think there is, calculate it out, and then we can either reaffirm that it's 12 or come up with a new number. But based on the data that we have, I think would be the best way to do that.
John, this is Bill. I would suggest it's probably more complicated than that. The expectations for the people likely to live in the TSAs is not your average suburban crowd. I mean, fewer children, probably more seniors and young people are probably not the most likely to be using large athletic fields, particularly when they have the other range of options available to them. So I think it's worth looking at. I just don't think it's as simple as sort of a standard formula for other parts of
I think there is one, but this is not for the TSAs, or not only for the TSAs. This is for all of Reston. So.
And I'm going to disagree. There are a lot of singles, a lot of one bedrooms and studios, and those are single young people, millennials who want to get out. If you are not on Nextdoor, you don't know what's popping in Reston. And a lot of people are asking, are there leagues for basketball? Are there, soccer, rugby? I haven't heard anybody for field hockey, but there are definitely requests. And Bill, you're on RPZ, you know the breakdown of the apartments. It's primarily 75% single, either studios or one bedrooms. Those are not, you're right, they're not going to have children, but these are not children using it. These are adults looking. You can't get on a soccer field. There are pickup games everywhere. So
I'm going to agree with Bill, and I'm going to base it, this is Mike Jennings, on I have two millennials who live in Arlington, and all their friends live in Arlington, and they're not, complaining that they don't have enough parks or little pocket parks or rooftop parks. I think the people that are moving into these urban areas are way different than those of us who moved here in the 70s and 80s. So I think we just really need to think about that.
I agree with you, Mike, but I want to just comment on, hey,
can I just add something from
times have changed with COVID and people being stuck in their apartments, and they're desperate to get out and have some group activity with sports. So I guarantee you, if you go by any of the basketball places in Reston, it's packed.
No, they're not. Go by Twin Branches. Tammy, when's the time you went by Twin Branches? I haven't seen anybody on that court in years.
Okay, so Michelle had asked to speak, and I'll be honest, you have at least two millennials that are on this task force. So go ahead, Michelle.
I'm sorry, I just completely disagree. I was just with a group of other millennials, and we were all saying that it's difficult to find courts to play anything on as adults. And yes, this was important when I was even a younger millennial, that we would have facilities that we too could use. And these are very much needed. They're very difficult to find. So I'm sorry, but not in line with the reality right now.
And I'll go ahead and add to that as another millennial in this task force. One of the reasons we moved out of Arlington and out of the district was to have access to these types of facilities. Part of the reason why we chose to live here.
So you're off the greenway. You're discussing something different.
We're talking about G, how many large recreation facilities are needed in Reston.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hey, Jennifer, this
so
is
we can ask staff. Go ahead, Chris.
You're one of your other millennials on the line. I had one of those with a young child. I think that's part of the reason we moved to Reston was some of the recreation spaces here and trying to find ways to make them connective and then supportive through all ages, both young and to myself. I'm more of a solitary recreator though, not a sports guy. So, but I agree. I have many colleagues who like that recreation space.
And Jennifer?
Yes.
Going back to the discussion of how many are needed, I think part of the calculation that Commissioner Carter was talking about was, I think, how the 12 came up here. And certainly Reston needs to have adequate recreation provided, by the county so that we can have what you and Chris and Michelle just talked about. So it's important. I think the comparison to Arlington isn't a very good one for many reasons. Having worked there for a bunch of years, but at any rate, just a thought to go back to Commissioner Carter's recommendation about the calculation. Although difficult, it is certainly something that should be in the comprehensive plan in my mind.
I wasn't intended to open up a philosophical question here. I was just intending to do a calculation. The staff is pretty sophisticated. We have a world-class parks department here. I wonder if a calculation, I think they do this often, but I think just let the staff do the work, and then we can enter into the philosophical aspects of it when they're done. It's a simple calculation using the data we have. Otherwise, why do we produce the data? We just take it out.
All right. And I'm sure Jose took notes for us, and it's now on our list. So we will have that on our list to follow up on. Any other additions to our list?
I'll just jump in, John. I looked up as we were sitting here.
Good.
The policy plan recommendations for athletic fields are 1 rectangular field per 2,700 people. And so if you take just the 105,000 people that you've projected in the land use plan, that's 39 athletic fields to serve Reston overall. Now we can quibble as to whether 2,700 is the right number, but that's a boatload of ball fields.
Yeah, but I would let the staff come up with what they think. I thought there was something in the policy plan, and maybe that's a little too much, but I just think a little more attachment to the data rather than just asserting different things would be a little more rigor to the plan would be a good thing. But let's see what they come up with.
Okay. Any other final comments before we move on to the next topic? Okay. Well, I will stop sharing and thank those of you who have volunteered. Maybe over the Thanksgiving holiday, we can bring all of these changes together and present. I don't know if we'll officially be in December by then, but after the Thanksgiving holiday, whenever our next meeting after that is. So I'll turn it back over to G. Walter for our next topic.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate everything you're doing on that, and good discussion. A lot of good input tonight. I think definitely some more work to be done, but making progress there. So, John, are you ready? I think you got volunteered to go tonight.
I'm all set. I'm all set. But somebody's got to share my screen, or I do it. I'm not sure how. I've got it on my screen now. How did I get it? How do I get it on everybody else's screen? Jose, do we?
Yeah, we'll give you the presenter role and you should be able to share your content now, John.
So there should be a share button down by where you start and stop or mute yourself.
There it is.
Okay. And then you just pick which thing on your computer you want to share.
And there it is. Is it
and
is
then
it
you
up?
hit share again one more time. It's a blue button.
It's coming up, John.
Starting to share. Good job.
All right, that's working. And by the way, John, as you're pulling up this document, just wanted to remind everybody who wants to ask a question who's an attendee and not a panelist. I think tonight everybody's just been unmuting themselves and jumping in, and that's been fine. But if you're an attendee and you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please do raise your hand electronically by going to the participants button, and then I believe at that point you should see a little hand click on. Okay, John, go right ahead.
Can you make
Okay,
it
this is
bigger?
make it bigger. Yes, I can do that. Let's see.
I can't read that.
Is that better?
Click
A
the green
little
button.
bigger.
A little bigger. Let's see.
John, click the green button next to the
In
red.
the upper left-hand tab, in the upper
There you
left-hand
go.
corner.
The green button.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Well, that's good enough.
Okay. All
There
right.
you go.
So these are
Yeah,
some
this,
things. What's that? So these are not tremendously exciting, but they can be when we don't do this right. And there are maybe some changes to our regulations that are needed. And they should be done, far be it for me to say this, but they should be done at the same time as the comp plan. We don't often do this. And so these are 4 items that I've been thinking about. And the first one is all about the caps. It is unclear to me how road rights of way are zoned. So I think we need a section in our zoning ordinance that spells that out. And the reason why I say that is I don't know where areas like the Reston Parkway or the Fairfax County Parkway that's in Reston property, but is in the PRC zone, or what is it? It's shown on the zoning map as blank. And I think those should be in the PRC zone. And to help this cap issue, we need to make the acreage larger if we can, to help protect the caps. We also have Sunrise Valley Drive and Sunset Hills Road that are long linear roads, and it's unclear to me what they're zoned. And I think they should be zoned, or they should be in the PRC district. So I've offered a text amendment that you see there in bold. And I've even offered where you would put this. And so that the overall density for the PRC district is 13 people per acre and associated commercial. The gross residential and associated commercial areas within the Reston comprehensive plan boundary include the entire public rights of way of all streets adjacent to the PRC zone. The effect of this is to make the PRC larger and to clarify when it's not spelled out what the area is zoned, and particularly the rights of way are zoned. So this is a simple text amendment. I say it's simple. The staff might have other ideas. The second one are the land use categories. This is something that bothers me. Maybe it doesn't bother others, but we have a land use map that has a legend on it that spells out the densities of the different categories: low, and high single family, low, medium, and high multifamily. That land use plan is in conflict with the zoning ordinance, and it's causing some confusion, particularly in areas like the village centers, which were designated one thing from a zoning perspective and something else on the land use. So I would suggest, and I know this is not a small thing, so again, staff would have to enter into this. I would suggest change the zoning ordinance to match the land use plan so that we get these densities correct, or in my view, correct. And this is the actual section and how you would do it. So this is the way it reads now. Where it's crossed out, that's what's in the zoning ordinance now. And what is underlined is actually what's in the land use plan. And you can see the difference. My next one is subdivision requirements. Now Supervisor Alcorn mentioned this in the beginning, although I don't think he was talking about subdivision requirements, but we have a large number of private streets. And I actually live on a private street. My private street is owned by RA. It's owned by a the Lake Ann Condominium Association, and it's owned by Washington Plaza Cluster Association. It provides access to all. I live on the end of that, so it's not clear. Well, it's clear who maintains that, but there are conflicts that occur, and who owns it is not totally clear. So I would suggest, and I've done this in other areas, that private streets must be on their own separate lot from all the adjacent areas, so that you can have an organization that controls that private street rather than have it broken up by a lot of different property owners along the way. This would take care of maintenance, but it also takes care of some of the things that Supervisor Alcorn has talked about: who has access to it and what are you allowed to do in that right of way. So as each project comes in, you would subdivide the private street separately, and you would spell out who's responsible for maintenance and what the expectations are in terms of what you can do on those. And I think, as you know, in the town center that we have, there is an issue about access to those private streets. My last one is finally catching attention. This is pedestrian access for all. This is deep in our regulations, but it's also deep in how we do things. We need action now. There have been follow-on motions. There have been a lot of back and forth between me and applicants. This is also being started in Tyson's. If any of you read the Post last weekend, there was an article about Tyson's and access. Are we compromising access, particularly for people that have challenges to their walking ability? So this would address or attempt to address that. You've heard me talk about access to the metro stations, particularly Wheelie, and especially town center. You can't get there as a pedestrian, or you're very much challenged at getting there from a pedestrian perspective. So we need different street standards, the travel lanes. We need different sidewalk standards, and I won't get into the details, but I've kind of spelled those out. So I think for the Silver Line to work, pedestrians have got to be able to get there, and we're really challenged in Reston and Tyson's. Tyson's is starting this, and I'm going to a meeting tomorrow to start talking about that. I don't know whether we'd want to join them or whether have our separate parallel route, but I think this is becoming all the rage in the county, and we ought to specify this in the comp plan. So at that point, that's all I have. If you like those, we will put them in the comp plan. If you don't, we'll take them out. So it's up to the task force at this point.
John,
John, a question, please.
Yes.
I would like to comment on this would be a great time to put in the comprehensive plan that the sidewalks will have wheelchair access.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Jan. That's the very bare minimum that we ought to be able to have. And they ought to have two at each intersection, or they ought to have 2, 4, 6, 8 at every intersection. Right now, the handicap ramps take you out into the center of the intersection rather than to the crosswalks. Instead of a single access point that directs you into the intersection, you should have a access ramp, not just for the handicap, for all those people that are challenged in any way, directed to the crosswalk specifically. But yeah, excellent, Jan.
Okay, that's good, because we could put it in the plan and make it something that the developers have to do.
Yeah, well, developers are certainly willing to do it. It's our officials willing to require it or even allow it.
Hey, John.
Yes.
On your first point.
Yes.
As I understand it, you're saying is that roads are not included in the calculation for the acreage that's then used for the cap.
I'm not sure. I don't think they are. I don't think they are, because most of them are unzoned.
let me ask, if you go back to Robert E. Simon, when he initially bought Reston, he bought the totality of it, including
There
any
you go.
roads that existed at that time, which would be included in the overall acreage. So I'm not sure, to get to your point, it would seem to me that what would have to have happened is to say, when my neighborhood was built in the mid 80s, somebody from county staff had to go through and subtract all the roadways out of the total acreage of Reston, and I'd be very surprised if that happened. So
I think where
I'm asking the question is, are you sure that roads are not included in the acreage that's used for the PRC cap?
when you're talking about a subdivision or an individual development, those private streets or public streets, they are included. What's not clear is things like the big ones, like Fairfax County Parkway. It's shown as unzoned. It certainly was purchased by Robert E. Simon at the beginning, but I don't think that's included in the PRC area, and I think it should be.
See, my point is, somebody would have had to have subtracted that acreage out because it existed. I remember it was just trees at one point.
I think that's what happened.
And I don't know
because
that
this was a GIS. Well, I think it has. I think it
okay,
has.
well, we can certainly determine whether it has or hasn't happened. Or
But
can
whether it has or hasn't, it wouldn't hurt to make sure it's included. But I think the original calculation for the PRC area was a GIS exercise, not a going back to the original Robert E. Simon. And it's unclear in areas like Sunrise Valley Drive, where you have the old RCIG on one side and you have neighborhoods on the other side. Where is the boundary between? And I'm suggesting it should be on the right of way of that should have been part of Robert E. Simon's original calculation, and therefore it's in the PRC. And I'll bet that wasn't done in the calculation.
All right, I'll take the bet on a large double mocha.
Okay.
Careful, John.
Your choice.
Just to be clear, this is a notion to get the PRC land larger as
Yeah,
or
well,
as large
I
as
don't
it
know
should
that
be.
that's a good
That's the
thing to do.
purpose.
So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
I did see Bill Mayland, and Bill, I don't know if you were going to address any of this, but you might be the one person on the call that knows the answer there.
Well, I don't know exactly offhand where the PRC boundaries were for those individual roads, but the proposed language doesn't change the boundaries of the PRC district. The only way to change the boundaries of the PRC district is by a rezoning. So the zoning ordinance defining the PRC boundaries doesn't change the PRC boundaries. The way it was done originally was Robert Simon and others came in and rezoned a specific amount of land area and then dedicated right of way for public streets and reserved that right of way dedication for density credit. So that's how the PRC district was established. The only way to increase it is by rezoning more land to PRC or by changing the caps. If it's a cap exercise, as John indicated. This language proposed here will not effectuate a change in the land area of the PRC district by itself.
What was the Fairfax County Parkway rezoned by Robert Simon in the beginning? I don't know whether it was PRC or whether it was something else. I suspect it was PRC zoned, but then when you see it on the map, it shows as nothing. It shows as unzoned. So what is its zone today? And I don't think the zoning ordinance is clear about that.
But again, the zoning ordinance wouldn't define the boundaries of the PRC district. That's the individual rezoning cases that define that boundaries. Again,
Yeah.
I don't know where the boundaries are for those right of ways. If they dedicate the entire right of way or half the right of way, I couldn't tell you without doing that research. I know long before I started doing PRC Reston, people came up with the numbers, and I believe that they did it by looking at previous site plans and rezoning applications with the PRC district, which is 6,200 some acres, I forget. And that's what the acreage is used to base upon the density cap. So, I mean, someone could do the research on it, but it's not going to change the boundaries of Reston by this language. The Reston boundaries are defined by the rezoning applications that are approved by the board.
Well, maybe someone could just do that check and then Dennis and I would settle down.
All right, thank you, Bill. Bill, did you have anything? Bill, did you have anything else?
Bill, wasn't there concern, particularly number two? I mean, that we talked about this before, and
Yeah, so
do you have some points about that?
I do. I don't, number one, know that there's been a lot of problems with this change that was came in place in 2014 when they created the different map changes for the Reston PRC. Reston PRC has 3 zoning categories: low, medium, and high. Village Centers has its own area in the Reston PRC, so it's the residential areas we're talking about. So this doesn't impact the Village Center. So if the problem I have is all the applications that are done today have defined themselves as low, medium, or high, and they don't match up with what's being proposed here. And I think, to be quite frankly, and I told you this before, I think this change will create a significant number of non-conforming issues with those existing plans that really is not benefited by what's being proposed. Beyond the fact you have to address the issue, you're proposing a high density of 50 plus DUs per acre, which currently is not permitted by a PRC. So you're creating a new zoning category, which isn't there today, of over 50 dwelling units per acre.
Maybe that should be deleted from the land use plan. That's not a bad idea.
Right, and we've talked about this before. There's 2 places in the land use plan that identify as 50 plus dwelling units per acre, and that was done based upon mapping issues. It has nothing to do with the zoning behind it.
Okay.
Bill, what does mapping issues mean?
So the 2 places that were defined as 50 plus dwellings per acre were Charter Oaks and what is the other one? The Harrison.
Fair.
And those are areas that when they did the mapping in the 2014 plan updates, they mapped the density based on individual tax map parcels. And in those 2 particular cases, Charter Oaks was under 2 or 3 tax map parcels. And the original development plan is how you calculate density under the PRC ordinance. So the PRC calculated density on a larger area than they mapped it, and it just happened to be a concentration of units under a portion of the site, which caused it to be over 50 dwellings per acre. But you go back to the original history of the original PRC district and how those applications came about, they're both under 50 dwellings per acre. So the way they mapped it was inconsistent with the zoning ordinance. But it did not ever give them any additional rights to develop above 50 dwellings per acre.
Bill, this is Mark, just to chime in on that. I mean, there are multiple examples where individual projects exceed 50 dwelling units to the acre on a standalone basis, but their zoning that's applicable to those sites average out to at or below that density. So
typically that's going to be in their town center areas where the mapping shows them something different than low, medium, or high. John's showing about. So town center is definitely over 50 dwelling units per acre in certain parts, but it's mapped as the urban core or town center, I forget. So it's mapped a little bit differently. So when you get into the residential portions of Reston outside the TSA and Village Center, that's where you get those 2 instances of the mapping show you over 50 dwellings per acre. But you're 100% correct. There's parcels in the urban core which are over 50 dwellings per acre, but the density is calculated on the entire urban core per the zoning ordinance.
And it's beyond there as well. I mean, because what's happened is that as development projects commence, the owners subdivide out either by subdivision or by condominium the development parcels so that they can finance it separately from the rest of the development. And so the collateral for the lender is limited to the development site versus the balance of the property subject to the zoning. So in the case of the Harrison, as an example, the lender didn't have the condominium units across the rest of the project as their collateral for the 2 building Harrison development. They just had the land area for the Harrison building as their collateral. And so that parcel is separately subdivided and developed at way more than 50 dwelling units to the acre. But the zoning that's applicable is tied into the rest of the condominium project that surrounds it.
I just want to move to an answer here. Are you suggesting that maybe we're going too far in trying to change the zoning ordinance, that it's okay that the land use plan is not in sync with the zoning ordinance? And I wanted to use this tactfully. The point is to use the land use plan for what it's used for, and then you just figure out how it fits with the zoning. So for instance, the low density number 3 is actually in the land use plan is actually number 2. And so you just use it that way. Is that what you're suggesting? So we don't really need to do this. And then maybe, or maybe not, we could delete number 5, the high density multifamily. Is that what you're suggesting?
Again, I don't see that the need is to do this at all.
Yeah.
In 2014, a decision was made to create a new land use map that was different from the zoning ordinance. If anything, I'd go back to the original land use map that reflected low, medium, high, but there were good reasons why they made those changes in 2014. And we've talked about this before. You know, what they reflected was basically the development at that time, which in some cases was significantly lower than what the original Reston plan was. And, you know, for instance, the medium in the plan is between 5 and 20 dwellings per acre. And now it's broken out between 5 and 12 and 13 and 20. So they create 2 different areas. And the intent behind it in the land use plan was essentially say those areas outside of the TSAs, outside the village centers are developed and should be stable and not redeveloped for something higher. So that was what the intent was kind of behind it, but that it didn't match up with the zoning, and it is what it is. But going back to change the zoning to match the plan, I see very problematic. I think we're creating a lot of situations where if someone is at 5 dwellings per acre, previously they were considered low, now they're considered high medium, high density single family. Does that all of a sudden give them a right to go up to 12 where they didn't have it before? And I don't know what it gets it, because all these applications are approved for a long time and developed. So retrofitting the zoning ordinance to these developed applications, I see problems understanding where they are, and I think we're creating non-conforming situations for no gain.
I get that. What do you think about the high density multifamily? Could that be deleted from the land use plan?
The 50 plus?
Yeah.
It's just how you want to map it. It's those 2 areas in the map. We've talked about Charter Oaks and
okay. So you'd have to keep that.
And Harrison, but you can map it differently, and we've talked about different ways to map it.
Okay. Let me jump in and offer a slightly different perspective on this, because at some level I agree with Bill, at other levels I disagree with him. Part of the issue that you have is you have a 2nd grade math equation that governs how you're doing land use planning in a corridor that has significant development that's occurred in the last 60 years that has sort of overtaken by events this 2nd grade math equation. You have areas where you're planning significantly higher intensities than the original 3 land use categories contemplated.
Yes.
Because you now have a rail system that you're trying to maximize the investment in by placing new residential development close to those stations. There are circumstances where the comprehensive plan authorizes development on 1 or more parcels that exceeds 50 dwelling units to the acre in these transit station areas. But the highest intensity that you can get under the PRC zoning is 50 dwelling units to the acre, which means that, set aside the urban density conversation for a second, you may never be able to realize what the long-term master plan calls for on a particular piece of land, because you're constrained by the zoning ordinance, not by the comprehensive plan. For a property owner, the way to reconcile the plan's recommendations is to rezone out of the PRC district and to go to a different zoning classification that's consistent with the comprehensive plan's recommendations. By taking land area out of the denominator without affecting the numerator, that second grade math equation gets flipped on its head. And you end up rendering you have the possibility of rendering the rest of the PRC area, if you want to take it to its logical conclusion, non-conforming from a zoning perspective because you've taken land area out
Right.
without affecting the number of units that remain in. And so in my mind, and look, I know it's 8:48 and we're going to end this meeting and I'm going to lay this bomb and we're going to walk away. But the reality is that at this point, when we're really using the comprehensive plan as the planning tool for how much development we're allowing to happen in Reston overall, and we're recognizing that rezonings are going to be the vehicle to implement it, it's the comprehensive plan and not the zoning ordinance going forward that's going to become the governing element for what development can occur. And so whether it's these 5 categories that you have on the screen or a different construct, I still think you need to have this conversation, probably outside of this task force and the comprehensive plan, about whether these land use categories and these numbers continue to make sense, given the emphasis on the comprehensive plan as the regulating tool for future development.
Yeah, that was the intent here. But what I'm getting from you, Mark, is that we ought to leave well enough alone, and that while this might have been well-meaning in terms of the land use categories, at this point in time, to link this with the comp plan is not a good idea. So I can accept that. And I hear what Bill's saying. The notion is that you just have the land use that's not in sync with the zoning. And at some point, we've got to rationalize this. But to try to get this settled, that this was perhaps a little too simplistic. Is that where we're going?
Well,
I think that's what I hear from Bill. I guess I hear that
yeah,
from
John, let's, we have that may be where we end up. We do have a few hands up though. Let's try to get to those before we wrap up. Mark, Malcolm, Tammy, and Michelle.
Thank you, Mark. First, with this, John Carter had mentioned about private streets, private subdivisions. That I understood it in terms of new roads, but I did not in terms of existing private roads, streets. When there are 4 to 6 homes that are serviced by a single private street.
Well, you wouldn't be able to go back in time. So
A number
what's
of
done is done.
subdivisions. You know,
Yeah.
how would that,
This
what's done is done and will stay. It's just with new ones.
Only when it occurs at subdivision, yeah, just with new ones.
Okay.
I mean, I'd love to fix my own street, but I
Just
can't do
needed to be
that.
clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Tammy, then Michelle, and I think that's it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say somebody had a question about what is John Carter talking about. This was a weirdo bunch of stuff that didn't fit exactly into land use. So we had a separate chapter devised, and the title of it would be
right there.
Subdivision and zoning ordinance modification.
Zoning, subdivision, and access is what I
Okay,
call it.
so you changed it since we talked about it.
Yeah.
That's fine. But it's just a separate, very short
Right.
chapter. And now it'll be revised and shortened even more. But it's such bizarre stuff that it doesn't fit logically into land use per se. So I just wanted to, somebody asked, what are we talking about? That's the deal.
Thanks, Tammy. I was
All right.
trying to eat and wanted to make sure that the task force, was inside of John Carter's head as to what the purpose was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Uh-huh.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Michelle, and we actually, I think Jan and Gary have their hands up as well. But Michelle, go ahead.
Sure. So on number 4, I like number 4 quite a bit, actually. And it seems that it could fit almost in either transportation or community health. And it was one of the things that I was hoping to accomplish also with community health. So maybe, if it comes down to that, there might be a place for number 4. On number 4 too, the one thing that has been a concern, I think, of a number of folks is that we've had a lot of great ideas in this task force, but as we're still discussing things, applicants are already, are pushing through applications. And so, they, without the benefit of some of these new ideas. And so it would be great too. And Supervisor Alcorn, this is to you. If we could all, implement these even sooner than when, our task force project has ended, specifically with number 4 in the pedestrian access and safety for all. It would be great to see some of these included in the applications that are before you now and will be before you before we are done.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Michelle. Some of these things are not comprehensive plan activities. I mean, this is calling for direction of changes to other policies and well, other things besides the comprehensive plan.
Right.
One of the things I want to throw out that that we might want to consider is, frankly, follow-on motions, so that once the comprehensive plan is tied up together and put into a single set of changes, after that, and this is something I've done before personally, there may be one or more or many motions for follow-on that relate to the implementation of the comprehensive plan. And so some of these ideas might go there. So that's one of the reasons I've said tonight and I've said before, where the task force has things that it wants to see happen that may or may not actually belong in the comprehensive plan, but where there's consensus, then get those down, because they may end up in a follow-on motion for implementation of the comp plan. So
I think I don't want to talk about this too much, Supervisor Alcorn, but this is unusual to put in a comp plan. To me, it's unusual not to put it in the comp plan. That if you have things in your comp plan that are critical to make the comp plan work, they belong in the comp plan. And I know the follow-on motions, we do that at the Planning Commission. I can get concerned that they get forgotten quickly.
Yeah, John, can I just jump in there on that? I mean, we had at the Board of Supervisors just a month ago, something that we actually had, and Barbara or somebody from DPD can point to this. But basically, when the Tyson's plan was adopted 12 years ago, there were 21 follow-on motions. 18 of those came from the Planning Commission committee that I chaired. And all 21 are being measured and monitored every year and reported on from staff. So as long as I'm supervisor, and we do this the right way, we'll do that again. So yeah, I understand the concern, that some things might not happen, but there are also, and Michelle, I have to say, certainly for anything in the comprehensive plan, let's make sure that it actually is adopted before I don't want to get in a position of frankly getting sued and losing by trying to adopt something, force it into a rezoning where there's it's not yet in the comp plan, because it's a powerful tool, but let's make sure we're using it appropriately. And Barbara, did I see you speaking?
Thank you. I had turned on my mic, but you're absolutely correct. If someone would like to look at the new Tyson's tracker, there's an entire section on the 20 follow-on motions that we reported on
20.
every year. Also, a number of other larger plan amendments have come through that have follow-on motions, and those get reported on back to the board with all of those reports or actions that come about, as each item gets done and checked off the list.
Let me be clear. So these 4, and maybe we've got 3 now, the point is to have those adopted at the same time or before the Board of Supervisors acts on the comp plan.
Well, I think we really need to have a conversation, probably offline, because
Okay.
I'll talk to you about one of them. Or at least one of them, maybe 2. I have some real concerns about them, and I think we should have a meeting to talk through them, because I think there are perhaps some misconceptions about some of these things that we need to work through.
Okay, Barbara, thank you. Michelle, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I do want to just make clear that, my comment was specific to number 4. I'm
Yeah.
hoping we can address access and safety as soon as possible.
No, and Michelle, I totally agree. I had an hour-long meeting with VDOT this afternoon on exactly that topic. So, yes,
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And Jan and Gary, and I think that's it, although I've kind of messed up my screen, so I'm not 100% sure. But Jan, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. 2 things. One is, can we get a copy of what's on the screen?
Sure.
And the other thing is that I want to make sure that the language for accessibility, accessibility in the sidewalks is in the comprehensive plan. Now, I'm not sure what section would be, but I think it's vital that we get that in there so that when they are following the comprehensive plan, they're following that.
It's in the transportation section. I'm not sure it's exactly as expressed here. So John Mooney and Bill Penman and I have to go look at that.
I also believe that it's in land use, not specifically like it would be in transportation, but the connection points between parcels, that we have consistent curb and Carter, we worked on this language, like the way the curbs are shaped would be consistent, going down the a street, so that they wouldn't change from parcel to parcel. We put some language in land use on that piece.
I think it should be better, stronger wording on that, because I think that's urgent. I think it should be both, quite frankly.
You think it should be
All
what?
right. In both?
In both, yeah. I think that's a good option.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. And Gary, I think you get the last word.
Well, it was really a question to Bill. There was a lot of conversation by Mark and then John relating to those categories, and then I didn't hear you respond to that. If you could take a second and go back and say what you might have said in response to them. Bill Malin.
I'm sorry, in response to what now is related to the.
Well, the whole conversation, you finished, and then Mark Looney went through, pretty substantial points relating to that, and then John Carter, and that I didn't hear you respond to them.
Right.
Maybe I missed it, but I didn't think I did.
So as most people remember, a couple years ago, we did propose an amendment to the PRC district, which increased the cap. We did that by increasing from 13, I think it was to 14 or 15 people per acre. So I think maybe that's what Mark is more talking about, because there is an issue with the cap, and John's recognized that. If I remember correctly, there's around 1,200 or so units available under the PRC before we hit the 13 people per acre, which, as Mark said, means if people want to develop in accordance with the plan, they're going to have to either rezone out of the PRC district, or you'd have to amend the PRC to increase 13. You also had an issue with Mark's familiar with was the Boston property site. The plan was 3 to 4 FAR, and they were limited by 50 dwellings per acre. They were able to find a creative way to make it work by expanding the areas of the development plan to make that development work. But that's not always going to be the case. You might have situations where the 50 dwellings per acre does create limitations on ability to meet the potential of the plan. I think that's another one of Mark's cases over at Roland Clark, where the development was much smaller than they maybe anticipated they wanted to do because of the PRC limitations. So it's a reality in there, and revisit it, sure, but it was a year-long process that didn't finish itself. So I think it'd be, I don't know that we can do a zoning ordinance amendment to rechange the density and the PRC and the land use categories in a few months' time, quite frankly. And I think that's a very long process, especially one that goes as far as what Mr. John Carter was talking about.
Thank you, Bill.
Can we request that it sounds like there's some offline conversations that will happen. Can we request that they come back to the task force? Because I think that this is a topic of interest, and certainly if we're going to do follow-on motions, further discussion would be helpful, or clarification would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I
do
think
that.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, here's what I would suggest, though, to move this along a little bit. That number one is the rights of way. We don't really know what the rights of way are zoned, so that's just a checking, and it's basically a large bet. I'm betting we have more land in the PRC than we think. Somebody wins, it doesn't matter. I think pursuing it, though, would be a good idea to help this cap issue. Number two, I guess I'm willing to just delete that, assuming that we can just live with a land use plan that's different than the zoning plan, and you just work between the two in the future. So I guess tentatively we're going with deleting number two. Number three, I didn't hear a lot about that. I just think that getting that in its own land with a separate outfit controlling that and making that part of the review process is critical. We have this major problem in places like Lake Ann Village Center and in the town center, where the wrong people are controlling who deal with the land. And then number four, I think that's a good one. I think maybe if we end up with only number four, we could probably put that in the transportation section. If you want a separate section, we could have a separate section, and you could call for it as follow-on motions, or you could do it at the same time. Either way. So, but that's kind of the direction I think the task force is going, and I think those would be the marching orders with this second review with staff. Would that work?
But I think we covered a lot of that in transportation, John, just to let you know.
I think you covered it in this way. And I'm concerned about the details, and I'm concerned about our development projects that go forward. And I'm concerned about the lateness that all of this is happening. We need to move along and get this done. We can't get pedestrians to the Silver Line, and we need to do something about that now.
Yes, true.
Yeah, thank you, John. Good points. And some of these things, again, as I've said before, let's do make sure where there are areas of consensus that the task force gets those down somewhere as part of the recommendation. And so
That's
yeah.
a better way of putting it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Any final questions or comments before we break? All right. Well, we ran over about 7 minutes tonight.
Wait a minute, Walter.
Tammy?
We need to figure out what we're doing next Monday.
Oh, you're right, Tammy. Tammy, thank you. All right. Thank you, Tammy. If the agenda's not in front of me, I just forget it.
Housing will be back, will be ready.
Housing's coming back. Okay, good. What other topics might be ready for next week to come back?
Charles, can you bring back public facilities?
Well, the good news is I can get it done by next Monday. The bad news is I may not be available next Monday.
Oh,
I have very good attendance, but that might be the one time I miss. Sorry.
Well,
Yeah,
can you at least send out the your revised up-to-date thing so we can look at it?
Yeah, I was going to work on that over the weekend.
sounds to me as though the 29th would be a better date to put that on the agenda.
okay, all right. So we've got at least housing.
What about
maybe-
transportation? Can we get that on?
No, it won't be ready.
Okay.
Okay. Tammy, what else is on your list?
Didn't we have one on implementation?
Well, that was tonight.
Yeah, this is a replacement for that.
Okay, well then, Carter, we talked about some metrics, so for health and stuff, so I'd like to have those added.
Great. All right.
Can we do community health and housing?
Not on community health. We haven't received feedback from staff.
Okay.
Wow. How long have you been waiting for that? Can we make up stuff then? You're not getting the feedback you need?
Yeah,
Like,
if
can we just go
anybody,
ahead
let
and
me,
write
can
it
I
and
just
then-
make this a standing offer? Anybody that's having problems getting feedback from staff, I'm happy to be a part of a meeting personally. Because I don't want people pointing fingers and saying we didn't get the information we needed. It might not be what we want to hear or you want to hear, but yeah, let's make sure we get everybody together that needs to get together to get this moving forward.
And Walter, this is David again.
Yeah.
If I would really like to have housing discussed next week, but I don't want it discussed before John and Lynn and I have had a chance to chat. So if that doesn't work out over the weekend, I'm loath to give the task force, 5 hours on Monday to read it before we talk about it. So let's see what Jose can come up with.
David, whom did you say you wanted to discuss it with?
Commissioner Carter and Lynn.
Okay.
Not John Mooney.
Lynn may be
John, you're
available
off the hook.
during the week, waiting
You're
for
off the hook.
appointments or whatever. Be in a hotel, so don't count that out. She may be available.
I was gonna send a note offline.
Jose's going to contact Lynn and see if that could happen. So let's say fingers crossed housing, okay, for next week. And Jose, are there any other on the list that you see?
So we did get heritage resources done, environment done, public art done. I know we have, so Tammy mentioned housing, public facilities.
Commerce is done.
Commerce is done. I know Michelle said community health is not ready. Parks we discussed tonight. We have transportation, land use, and I don't know if I skipped public facilities, but Charles said he wasn't going to be available. So,
Michelle, would you be ready for interwoven equity?
We're in a similar situation. We've already met with staff on equity multiple times, and so right now we've asked for their written comments and have not received it.
Okay.
Well, how about if we submit your chapter and then they do their written comments when they're looking it over for the final staff process. Instead of having two staff things, have one. Would that
This
work?
is St. Clair, planning and zoning. I just want to clarify. So I believe with both equity and community health, right now the process is trying to schedule that meeting. So I think Jose is working to try to coordinate the meeting. So once we get that scheduled, staff is ready to meet and discuss comments with on those topics.
We've already done a meeting where we've discussed comments to a draft on equity. So I think per the description of the process that you said previously, it would be you would meet with us and then you would provide written comments. So now we're at the written comment stage.
So you're waiting written comments, is that right, Michelle?
Yes.
I think we're confused as to what the process is.
Again, we can provide written comments. Again, I think at this point, staff's been working to schedule a meeting to discuss both equity and community health. And again, I think it's just a matter of getting that meeting scheduled. That's really where we are right now.
So again, the live ask though, I think it would be where we are, we've already met on equity. And so if you could provide written comments on equity, and if you could also just provide written comments on community health, that would be incredibly helpful.
We don't need another meeting, that's what you said.
I hear discomfort on Sinclair's part.
I think we would like to have a meeting to kind of discuss things, but again, we can work on preparing feedback. And again, we'll coordinate with Jose on just the best method of providing the feedback.
We've been coordinating, so yeah, whatever. I mean, if you could provide some written feedback, that would be great. I'm not sure why that it presents an issue.
Yeah, the only reason, Michelle, is this is a little bit different process. I mean, for all the other chapters, we've talked about doing, verbal feedback, get initial task force recommendation, and then county staff's going to do written feedback. I know, at least informally, some chapters we have gotten transportation, others. So
we did that with equity already.
Yeah, got it.
We did that. So
all right.
we are on the written stage with equity.
Yeah, and we may just end up with two versions. There may be a task force version and a staff version at some point, and that's okay. All right. Well, I will talk with staff about getting feedback, Michelle, to you. I am looking at the deadline of self-imposed of trying to get these chapters out by Christmas. So yeah, I will. Let's see if we can move on that. It looks like we've got, I believe, 4 more meetings before then to get through all these items. Okay. All right. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate your work on that. Jose, any other topic areas sitting out there?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
That was it.
All right. Well, at this point, we're just looking, I guess, at housing, and that's fingers crossed for next week. But let's see what we can do to thank you, Jose, for trying to reach Lynn and see if that conversation can happen this week. And also, Jose, let's talk tomorrow about to see if there might be something that could help move the community health and equity sections along as well.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we spent a few more minutes talking about this. It's 9:17. Any last comments? Tammy, did I forget anything?
No, Walter, you're perfect.
Well, I don't know about that, but we are 17 minutes over, but we did get through a lot tonight. So thank you, everybody, for all this and also everything everybody's doing in between these meetings.
Thank you.
It is coming together.
Thanks, everybody, for everything